Who knows what that is? Oh, what's that? It makes clothes. It has a name. Do you know what the name of a machine that makes clothes is? This is called a sewing machine, and it's used to make clothes. Can you see this? This is a pedal, and your foot goes rum, rum, rum. Today, I'm going to tell you a story. Are you going to help me?
Yes.
And you're going to help me by doing this. This is what a tailor does. A tailor cuts the material. He goes snip, snip, snip. And then he stitches with a needle. He goes stitch, stitch, stitch. And then he uses his sewing machine and he goes rum, rum, rum. And then he ties a knot in the string. He goes pick, pick. Okay. Once upon a time, there was a tailor. And not just any tailor, the best tailor in the whole village. He made the children's clothes. He made the adults' clothes. He made the king's clothes. He made everybody's clothes. And he was such a good tailor, people would come from all around just so he could make their clothes. One day, he decided he would make himself a long coat for the winter. And so he went snip, 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 stitch, 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 rum, rum, rum. And he made himself a long, warm coat for the winter. And he loved his coat. He wore his coat here. He wore his coat there. He wore his coat everywhere. Caps. Excellent. And he wore his cap here. And he wore his cap there. And he wore his cap
everywhere.
And he would roll his cap up and put it in his back pocket. Until one day he took it out and he shook it off and it started to tear. And he was very sad. Till he remembered he was a
tailor.
So he went
snip, 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 stitch, stitch, stitch,
rum, rum, rum. Who wants to wear the jacket? Let's have a girl. Stand up, my sweet. Up on Waba. You can have the jacket and you're going to boil, but it's okay. Just a little bit, okay? So he made himself a jacket. Stand up jacket. And he wore it here. And he wore it there. And he wore it everywhere. Ha! But soon his jacket became torn and the buttons started falling off. And he was very sad. Then he remembered he was a
tailor.
So he went
skip, 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 stitch, stitch, stitch,
rum, rum, rum. And he turned his jacket long coat into a jacket. And he wore his jacket here. And he wore his jacket there. And he wore his jacket everywhere. How do we begin a story? What do we say when we want to tell a story? Once upon a time. He goes pick. And when he goes pick, he ties a knot. Look carefully at that word. He ties a knot. He ties a knot. He ties a knot in the thread. Okay. A comma means you take a breath. Okay, so I say, I don't say, he wore it here, he wore it there, he wore it everywhere. No, I say, he wore it here, he wore it there, he wore it everywhere. So this little thing here means I have to breathe. What's the opposite of sad? Happy. Fantastic. Write the word happy for me.
Y.
Excellent. Okay. You can give me this closer word for tailor. Chupa. How about umtungi? It's a person, so we need to start with. Yes. want you to write nice and big, please. Don't write small so I can't see it. So how do we start our story again? So I want you to write the story of the tailor, and I'm going to put some words up in order, and we're going to write the story of the tailor. Okay. But this is a funny word because after that comes this funny letter, the O, and then another P, and then an E. To see him. And that's the end of our sentence, so we need to put a full stop. There's a picture of a scissors, if you want to draw a scissors, because a tailor uses a scissors. You can draw I'll put it up, my sweetheart.
The story that I used today, The Tailor, is a great story for the vocabulary that it provides us with. It's everyday things. It's perhaps a profession that the children would have come into contact with. It's certainly something that they can relate to. My job was to create an environment where they didn't feel that they were under any pressure, that they were not anxious. The minute that a child feels anxious or scared or embarrassed, it shuts down their ability to take any information in. In fact, they retreat from the situation. So the first thing I need to do is create an environment where children feel comfortable enough to speak in this language that they don't hear very often, and probably the only place they encounter it is at school. Telling my story in a way that allowed them to speak the language without making them feel that they had to get it right, perfectly right, nor that they were the sole people who we focused the spotlight on. Everybody was doing the repetitions, and everybody was in the chimes, the stitch, stitch, stitch. And that allowed children who perhaps would have shrunk away and not spoken at all during a lesson to participate orally in a lesson. The children need a hook on which to hook what they know onto what I'm trying to tell them it is in English, and the way to do that is through using something like a picture or something like an actual object like a jacket or a hat. I'm trying to build meaning. The ability to decode is not reading. The ability to be able to read a book in English doesn't necessarily mean a child can understand it. And so my aim is, in a lesson, is at the end of it, I want the child at least to go away with the story. So the thing with stories is that you won't ever tell a story once in a classroom. You will tell a story, and depending on the level of engagement or how the story connects to the children, they'll want you to tell the story over and over again. The strategy I chose to use for this particular story was summarizing, and it's a strategy I would use for every single story I tell. It's not something you do once off. It's in our curriculum. The child needs to be able to summarize. We write it, we read it, and in the act of doing both those things, I demonstrate writing. I demonstrate pronunciation when I read it back. I demonstrate a whole lot of other things that are not explicit, things like phrasing, things like expression in your voice. And I did bring that out at times, for example, in the use of a comma. So it's a punctuation example. So we're not just teaching children to decode and be able to maybe even comprehend, but also to be able to enjoy the language. Part of my goal of my lesson is to have fun. This particular story, is wonderful because, exclamation marks and commas and repetitions and actions, it all comes together, and at the end of it, you've had a really great time. When you actually need something tangible from the lesson, when you need to have a written piece of work, or you need the child to have gone away with homework, or you build it again from the story. So the ideas of glossaries in both languages. You can build up a store of English words that are specific to the story, but that can be used in any other form of reading and writing. In developing those glossaries, then the children become my teacher. They teach me the Xhosa. And so there you're building things like self-esteem, you're building things like confidence, and you're cementing and affirming and showing the children that what they know in their other languages are just as important as what they're learning in English, even though everything around them says that English is more important than their language. We know that it's not. We need to use what they know in order for them to gain access to English, and that's important too.